not just the insurance companies that are getting wealthy off of Americans. There's a massive transfer of wealth, of course, to the banks as well. Now, in an amazing PR blunder that was caught by Kit Daniels, J.P. Morgan Chase begs for mercy while not giving us any. They decided that it would be a good idea to have a question and answer program for their vice president, and they put this out on Twitter. Give us your questions. And people were coming back with things like this. Any plans to return illegally foreclosed homes to their rightful owners? If not, how do you justify your continued existence? Or do you have an org chart that's perfectly analogous to the criminal underworld? You know, capo, made man. Or do you just wing it? Does it feel any better paying the biggest bank fines in history so far, or did satisfaction of the crimes outweigh the fines? And as the article points out, earlier this year, the U.S. Attorney's Office opened criminal and civil investigations for fraud against J.P. Morgan for overstating their assets prior to the 2008 crisis. And that's still going on today. They have $1.95 trillion in assets, although they have $71 trillion in derivatives. As the article points out, that's 36 times what J.P. Morgan Chase owns, and this exposure is more than enough to crash the American economy. It's worse than the situation before the 2008 financial crisis.
So my question to you is, will you tell the American people to whom you lent $2.2 trillion of their dollars, will you tell us who got that money and what the terms are of those agreements?
We explain each of our programs. In terms of the terms, we explain the terms exactly. We explain what the collateral requirements are. We explain what.
To whom did you explain that?
It's on our website.
Yeah, okay.
So all that information is available in our commercial paper program.
And who got the money?
Hundreds and hundreds of banks. Any bank or that has access to the U.S. Federal Reserve's discount.
Can you tell us who they are?
No, because the reason that is counterproductive and will destroy the value of the program is that banks will not come to the discount.
Isn't that too bad?
I left Goldman Sachs. I sold my shares in Goldman Sachs.
Tax deferred, too. You didn't have to pay any tax on your $200 million.
I sold my shares in Goldman Sachs.
The clause that if you come into the administration, you sell your assets, it's tax deferred. You don't have to pay if you had $200 million profit and you didn't have to pay any tax. Isn't that true?
Listen, is
that true or not? Yes or no?
It is. You do not pay a profit when someone a tax when someone makes you sell assets.
Maybe that was an incentive for you to become Secretary of Treasury, so you didn't have to pay the tax there.
Oh. The next thing I would say to you, and say it very, very clearly, is I behaved with the...
You don't think you should have recused yourself when you asked Lehman to go in bankruptcy, you didn't put Bear Stearns in bankruptcy, and then you folded Merrill Lynch into... I mean, isn't there some point where you got to say, hey, I got a conflict of interest here? You don't feel any kind of scintilla of ethics on this thing at all?
Totally. I operated very consistently within the ethic guidelines I had as Secretary of the Treasury, and when it became clear that we had some very significant issues with Goldman Sachs and with
why didn't you recuse yourself
with Morgan Stanley, what I did then, it would have been very wrong for me to recuse myself. What I did was I went and got a waiver from the ethics agreement, because when we had concerns...
Who was in charge of the ethics agreement?
What?
Who's in charge of the ethics agreement that you got a waiver?
We have a Office of Ethics and Treasury, and we have a White House Ethics Office.
Matt Taibbi in Rolling Stone has a terrific article called "Everything is Rigged, the Biggest Price-Fixing Scandal Ever." And he's right about this. Now, first of all, we already know about LIBOR. That's how the banks colluded to fix the interest rates, and several banks have admitted to that and paid combined billions in fines, and there are billions more coming. Now, of course, the reality is they're affecting a $500 trillion market, so a couple of $1 billion in fines are no big deal compared to the money they've already made from it. This is the same story we've heard before, but the new twist is now it looks like the federal investigators might be looking into the London-based firm ICAP, which is the world's largest broker of interest rate swaps. Now, these interest rate swaps are actually very important, especially for local governments. And it sounds complicated, but basically it's how local governments oftentimes finance the projects that they're going to do. They're going to do a new stadium, they're going to do a new sewer system, they might do an interest rate swap. Now, it affects also a huge market. Well, how huge a market? A $379 trillion market. That is 100 times the size of the U.S. federal budget. So if it turns out that they fix that market, they would make a significant amount of money, and as usual, at our expense. So Taibbi explains, at ICAP, the interest rate swap desk and the 19901 screen, which is a technical thing that they use, were reportedly controlled by a small group of 20 or so brokers, some of whom were making millions of dollars. These brokers made so much money for themselves, the unit was nicknamed Treasure Island.
How do you prevent the crash of 2016? You have a chapter called Democratize the Economy.
Yes. To prevent the crash of 2016, we would have to make the fundamental changes that we're going to have to make afterward. You would have to start enforcing the Sherman Trust Act again. You would have which says that right now it was passed in the 1880s, and it says that basically any company that gets so large that they dominate an industry is illegal. And not only the company gets broken up, but people in the company can go to jail in the Sherman Act. And Reagan, in his second year of his presidency, stopped enforcement of it functionally, and no president since then has made a serious effort. The last one was Jimmy Carter breaking up AT&T. So now we have not just the media, but every significant industry in the United States controlled by 2, 3, 4, 5 at the most companies. This is, you know, when you look at biological systems, broad and diverse is strong. Top-heavy and narrow is fragile. So our economy is insanely fragile in that regard. So bring back the enforcement of the Sherman Act, thus break up the big banks, bring back Glass-Steagall, separate commercial banking from gambling banking, do away with the Commodity Futures Modernization Act. Phil Gramm took us from virtually no gray or black market in these bets on bets on bets, these CDOs, to $800 trillion worth in 2008. And you know, his wife Wendy was on the board of Enron. Ken Lay desperately wanted to be able to play these games. Phil Gramm got his legislation in 1999 and 2000. Bill Clinton, I think, had no idea what this would mean, just happily signed it, and that was when this was set. So if we did these things, we could prevent this. There's clearly not the political will, which is why I'm asserting that the crash will happen, and that will generate the political will.
What gives you the most hope when you see grassroots movements, which you cover too on the Tom Hartman Show?
Oh, yeah. What gives me the most hope is the fact that young people are waking up. They're getting it, particularly, I mean, you see it just on the ground in their student loans, that their parents, grandparents, and great-grandparents never experienced. That the predator class in this country is eating everything in its path. And the Occupy movement was a great beginning for that. We'll see what's next. And then on the other hand, you've got a lot of boomers who are still very politically active. It's the people in the middle who are just desperately trying to raise a family and work there.
You focus a good deal on the Koch brothers and what you call the Kochtopus.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
why are they so significant today?
Because they fund so many different pieces of what has become the libertarian/Republican machine. And this notion that government is bad somehow, that Reagan introduced in his first inaugural. The thing that people have to get is, you know, if you don't like government, that's fine, but if you take government out of the way, if you stop administering the commons by the government, there's an enormous vacuum, and there's a whole lot of billionaires who are just waiting to step into that vacuum. So if we don't have government regulation, for example, of you know, smokestack things, then you know, the Kochs make more money, but all the rest of us get more cancers.
And their wealth comes from?
It's interesting. Their father, you know, cut a deal with Joe Stalin to develop the oil fields in Russia, and today, I mean, there was a report a few weeks ago. We haven't been able to confirm all of it, that if the Keystone Pipeline is built, it goes to refineries in part owned by the Koch brothers, that they could make as much as $100 billion. That's more than they're actually worth right now.